Okay, Tov, today's daf is daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. And the last thing that we learned on the bottom of the previous Amud Chav Beis Amud Beis was a statement in the name of Rav Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok, Kol Talmid Chacham, and this on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, She'eno Nokem V'Noter K'Nochash, Eno Talmid Chacham. In other words, it's very important that the Talmid Chacham be omed on Kavod Torah. You know, if people take advantage, he has to be a bearer of a grudge like a snake. Vaksiv lo sikum lo tikar, lo titar. We're not allowed to bear a grudge. Hu b'momen hu dechsiv desanya ezi nekima ezi netira nekima amalo ashileni magolcha amalo lav lemacha amalo hu hashileni. So he comes back and he says, well, you didn't lend me your sickle yesterday. I'm not going to lend you my hatchet today. That's called Nikama. Zoe Nikama. Ezi Natira. Amalo Hashileni Kardumcha. Amale Lo. Lamach Amalo Hashileni Chalukecha. So the one who refused to lend his friend a hatchet now comes back and he says, please lend me a shirt. Amalei, take it. Why? Any kamoscha, I'm better than you. Shalo shaltani, you didn't lend it to me. Zohi nitira. This is a violation of nitira. So in cases of mammon, like these cases about a hatchet and a shirt, that's when the Torah forbids taking revenge or bearing a grudge. Rav Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok is talking about a person who is subjected to personal suffering. And in this case, the prohibitions don't apply. So the Gemara asks, V'tzaira de gufa lo, there's no lo sikam lo tikar. On tzaira de gufa sanya, we learned in the Brisa. Even with regard to personal suffering, the Brisa says, Hanelovim v'enam olvim, those who will suffer insult and will not respond by insulting the person who insulted them, shomim cherpasim mashivim, or those who hear their own disgrace, but they don't shoot out and reply against it. Osin me'ava usmecha b'isurim. They are performing the will of Hashem out of a love, and they are performing and implementing the ratzon of Hashem out of a state of ava, not for the sake of avoiding punishment, and they are happy with their suffering. And the pasuk in Shoftim says that there shall be love to him, God, like the sun going forth with all its might. And the Gemara tells us in Chulin that originally the moon was as great as the sun. God reduced the size of the moon, and the sun did not respond to the moon's complaint, and therefore it remained as it was. The moon who complained was diminished. Those who suffer insult but do not respond will be like the sun going forth in its might. They will emerge undiminished by their silence, whereas their antagonists will not only fall in their schemes, but will be humbled as well. In any event, this brisa clearly praises someone who is what we call now lovim vedam lovim. He maintains his silence even though he was subjected to personal disgrace. How then can Reb Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok insist that a Torah scholar take revenge when it's tzara de gufa, when it's personal suffering? And the Gemara answers, Liolam b'noket le b'libe. Actually, Reb Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok is not talking about going actively and avenging your own honor in the case of a Talmid Chacham, but rather he should keep it in his heart. And if at some point in the future he sees that that person that insulted him would be subject to some disgrace, he understands that that's min hashamayim as a retribution against that Hashem is bringing back down on the antagonist. And that's meant to remove the scholar's distress. So again, if a Talmid Chacham sees someone who's about to attack his antagonist, he doesn't have to protest, because he has to understand that the avenger here is really a shliach of Hashem, carrying out God's will that the antagonist be punished. So it comes out that according to Rav Ben Yod Tzadok, a Talmud Chacham who's required to take revenge and bear a grudge means only that he should remember any disgrace to which he has been subjected. Heaven will arrange for the retribution, and he should really appreciate the honor that his Torah knowledge deserves. Now, in the case of Shaul HaMelech that we discussed yesterday, he was not punished because he didn't respond to his detractors, but rather he was punished because when it says he remained silent in the face of insult, what it means to say is that he was really, in a sense, staying the hand of those who sought to avenge his honor. He should have realized that it was part of Hashem's plan that there be an opportunity for retribution against those who insulted the king. And very shortly, we'll give a summary of the entire sugya. The Omar Rava says, that if a person, instead of being omed on midosa and demanding retribution against those who insulted him, he is mavir al midos. If he relinquishes this and overrides this measure of retribution, is then Hashem will override any of his punishments for any of his sins. So it seems that he should simply relinquish any concept of retribution. And the Gemara answers, "Demefaisi le umefayis." That's a case where the person who insulted you came back to ask mechila, to placate you, to ask for pius, and then in such a case, you should completely forego the entire matter, and that's called ma'avirin al midosa. But Rav Ben Yod Tzadok refers to a case where the person who insulted the Talmud Chacham did not come to be mafayis him, he did not try to placate him, and in that case, the Talmud Chacham is required to keep this matter in mind. And if he sees that the antagonist will suffer, he has to know that that's God's retribution against him. So now we'll summarize the entire sugya. With regard to mammon, financial matters, we are prohibited from, number one, nikima, taking revenge. Number two, from netira, which means bearing a grudge and remembering, and so forth. We gave all the examples. Second point in our sugya is that in the case that someone was suffering personally, not just financially, then he's allowed to take revenge. However, that's not the ideal. The ideal would be that he refrained from taking revenge. Furthermore, if the antagonist is mefayes, he asks for mechila, and he's very sincere about his apology, then it's proper to forgive him completely. And in the case of a Talmud Chacham, in a case where his antagonist did not apologize, he should wait until God will bring about the retribution against this antagonist. The problem with this sugya, as we complete it and go on to the next, is a contradiction from the Gemara Megillah on Daf Chav Ches, which establishes that there were various Tanoim and Amoraim that had a midag that before they went to bed, they would forgive anyone who had aggravated them. And according to Agamor, at least in the case of a Torah scholar, he should not have ignored those personal attacks against him. So the Ritva says that Agamor is talking about religious matters, and there the Talmud Chacham is required to defend the Kavod Shamayim. But otherwise, if it's not a matter of defending Kvod Shamayim, then it is a zchus and it's meritorious for a Talmud Chacham to forgive those who have harmed him, regardless of whether they had apologized. The Rambam, on the other hand, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, makes the distinction between public and private humiliation. If someone insults the Talmud Chacham publicly, it would be a disgrace for the Kavod HaTorah if the scholar would just forgive him without the person, the antagonist, apologizing. But if it's a Torah scholar who's suffering an insult in a private context, then ideally he should forgive his antagonist unilaterally. And now we start the new sugya for today. So let's just make sure we're all on the same page. We're on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. We're about halfway through the Amud, and you'll see in a line that says Kol Psha'av that towards the end of the line it quotes the Mishnah after the two dots. Mayin Motziin Achas Ochtayim. This is a reference to the lottery, which is taken on the part of the Mamuna, and he supervises the lottery. And there's a competition for who will be zocher in the mitzvah of the Trumas Hadeshen. And the Mishnah says, Motziin Achas Oshtayim. Each Kohen is allowed, who's vying for this right, is allowed to lift up one finger or two fingers. So the Gemara understands, Hashta Shtayim Motziin Achas Miboy. If you're allowed to put out two fingers, why do you point out one finger? That goes without saying. According to Rav Chizda, will differentiate between the Mishnah, which is referring to a bari, and therefore we're only going to allow the Kohen to put up one finger, because if it's two fingers, it might look a little bit fishy. Why is he putting up two fingers? Is he trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the Mamuna? But in the case of a chola, that's when the Mishnah discusses the case of two fingers. He's very weak, and it's hard for him to put up one finger. He puts up two fingers. The Gemara asks the Kasha Vatanya, Achas Motziin, Shtayim Ein Motziin. And Bamedvar Mur Bebari Aval Bechol Afilu Shtayim Motziin. Fine. So far, that's an exact mirror image of what Rav Chizda had interpreted at Mishnah. But at the end of the brisa, it says, "Vayechidim motziin shtayim, v'ein monim lahem ela achas." Now, the implication here is that when this brisa at the closing section of the brisa says "Yechidim motziim shtayim," it sounds like the brisa is telling us that whether he's a bari or a chola, he's allowed to extend not one but two fingers, which we said in our Mishnah in the case of a bari is not acceptable. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, before you ask me a kasha on our Mishnah, the way Rav Chizda interpreted from a brisa, the brisa itself seems to contradict itself, because it says v'ein monim ela achas, and it means that we only count one finger when the Kohen puts out two fingers. So we have a first problem that the brisa seems to allow even a bari to put up two fingers. On the other hand, if the brisa went as far as to allow putting out two fingers, why does it say we only count one finger? It would seem that if we allow even a bari, according to this brisa, that he could put out two fingers, we should count each one of the fingers. And in fact, that's what the next brisa that we're going to quote seems to indicate. Vasanya, we learned in the brisa, Ein Motziin, Lo Shalish. Shalish, if you have five fingers, the shalish is the middle finger. Velo Gudol. The Gudol is the thumb. Mipnei Haramoin, because of those who tried to swindle. And we're talking about a bari, and we're saying that he cannot extend neither his middle finger nor his thumb in addition to his forefinger, which means that he's not allowed to extend a second finger. He's only allowed to put out one finger. And the brisa seems to assume that the previous brisa, he's allowed to put out two fingers. B'im hotzi shlish monim lo, although he shouldn't have put out his middle finger. If he did so, we will count it. But godol ein monim lo, we will not count it if he puts out his thumb. In a sense, we will penalize him, and we won't even count him at all. He's completely ignored. And the reason for that is because the thumb is the easiest finger to cheat with, as we mentioned yesterday. V'lo od el shaloke min hamemuna bipakia. The Gemara is going to have a whole discussion here what the word pakia means, but it seems like it's a utensil that's used to give lashes. And the memuna who's in charge, he will give lashes to that person who tried to swindle, and the Kohen puts out his thumb. But in any event, this brisa indicates that if a Kohen should extend his middle finger in addition to his forefinger, then we're going to count it. We're going to count an additional finger, as if to say we're going to count it as two different people, whereas our previous brisa said we only counted as one person. So the Gemara says there's no stira between these two brises. My monim lo nami achas. When the second brisa says monim lo, that b'di'evet, if he put out his middle finger, we will count him. It means we'll count him not as an additional counting because he already put out his forefinger. Now he's adding his middle finger. No, achas, we'll count him as one person. Now, my Pekia, Rav says Madra. My Madra, what's Madra? Rav Papa, Matrika de Tayai. Tayai, which we see all over Shas, is an Arab merchant. And Matrika is the stick or the whip that he uses to hit the animal. The psik reshe, and it's a very strong utensil because psik reshe, it's split on the end. Amar Abaye may rechav me. I always thought hadisnan when it says in Masechet Shkolim, Ben Bevai Memuna ala Pekia, there was somebody by the name of Ben Bevai, and he was appointed over the Pekia. Mina, what I thought that meant was silta, that when they had to find wicks for the menorah, it was his job to set up the wicks, Kirisnan. And this is all based on a Mishnah in Masechet Sukkot and Aleph, Mibloi Michnase Hakonim Umehem Yonehen Mehenayu Mafkin Ubehenayu Madliki. So the Mishnah says that the Michnasayim of the Kohanim, when they were worn out and they started disintegrating, or for example, the old belts that they had used time after time over the course of time began to disintegrate, then they would take the strands of these worn out Michnasayim and the Avnate, and they would use them as wicks for the menorah. And therefore it seems that the word mafkiin is a formulation as an active verb of the noun pkia, which means that we interpret the word pkia as referring to a wick. But now that I learned this brisa that says that if the Kohen puts out a second finger, then he will get lashes from the person who's memuna on the pekia. And Mina, now I understood that I made a mistake. And my pekia, what does the word pekia mean? It means pekia nagda. Nagda is a whip. Okay. Now the Mishnah tells us, they were running up the ramp in a competition who would get up there first. And one of them pushed the other one, and the other one, the victim fell and broke his leg. And now the Gemara is going to quote a very heart-wrenching brisa, very difficult to read this brisa, about another event. We'll have to see exactly when this event took place, of murder. Ma'aseh b'shnei kohanim, shneim shavim v'roshayu shneim shavim. So they were both running up the kevesh, and they were neck and neck. V'olim b'kevesh, and at the very end, kadam echad mehem, we'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain jumps ahead, l'toch arba amos shel chavero, and he gets there first. And Shimon is not going to tolerate this. He cannot tolerate that Ruvain got there first. So what does Shimon do? Terrible. Natal Sakin, he takes a knife, Vitokalo Belibo, and he puts it through Ruvain's heart. And we'll soon see that Ruvain, after a few seconds, died. Ahmad Rabbi Tzadok al Maila so Ulon. Rabbi Tzadok, who apparently is the Kohen Gadol, I'm not exactly sure, but in any event, Rabbi Tzadok stands on the Ulon, right? There were if you recall, we learned that going into the Heichal from the Ezra's Kohanim, there was steps, and he stands on the top of the steps, right at the entranceway to the Ulam, the Omar, and he declares, Achenu Beis Yisrael, Shimu, please listen to what I have to say. And here he invokes the parsha of Egla Rufa. Here's a case where we cannot identify the murderer because the slain corpse is found between the cities out there in the wilderness. And the Torah requires v'yotzus keinecha v'shovtecha. The elders and the judges have to go out and they have to engage in the entire ritual called Arifas Egla Arufa. This is an entire parsha in Dvarim Perek Chaf Aleph. Now, the purpose of the Zkenim, of the Ziknei Ha'ir and the Shoftim going out there for the Egla Rufa is to try to bring kapara for this murder. And that's in a case where we don't even know who murdered him. We just find the slain victim. Says Rabbi Tzadok, and this is the logic of a Kal V'chomer, Anu, in our situation, where we know exactly who the murderer was, we witnessed the murder, what a kapara we need. V'almila havi egla rufa. We can ask a lumcha question, who is actually obligated to bring the egla rufa? I mean, technically there is no egla rufa yet because we know exactly who the murderer is. But he's using this to make an impact on the people. Al ha'ir ohal hazoros. Shall we impose the obligation, the ritual of Egla Rufa only on the Kohanim who are here locally in the Azara, which means that we see the Azara as a separate entity, or on the entire city of Yerushalayim? Now, the truth is that you can't take this Gemara literally, this statement of Rabbi Tzadok, because the Azara is not a city. It's part of Yerushalayim. But he's trying to inspire the people, to bring them to tears for what happened over here. And go kol ha'am b'bchia, he successfully inspired the people. They all broke down crying. Now the next part of this brisa is something that's very hard to swallow. The father of this young Kohen finds his son in a state of mefarpim. Mefarpim means like his body is shaking before he dies. It's not a cognitive, kind of shaking. It's something that's in the body itself. Omar harehu kaparaschem, which literally means that his death should be a kapara. Very strange. But that's not strange enough. Vadayin b'nima farper v'lo nitma sakin. You should know that the knife is not tummy, because the knife inside a corpse is an avi avos hatuma, but my son is mefarper, so he's not dead yet, and therefore the sakin is not tummy. This is what's on the mind of a father watching his son perish. What do we learn, says the Brisa in closing, from this whole story with the father? Murder is not up on the agenda here. That doesn't interest them. What's more interesting to them is Tumas Kaleb. Is this Sakin Tomei? Is it not? The Chenu Omer, and the Brisa invokes a pasuk in Malachim Beis with regard to Menashe Melch Yehuda, who was guilty of so many different sins, amongst them murder. And the pasuk says, "Gam damnoki shafach Menashe harbe miod ad asher milas Yerushalayim peh lepeh." The city of Yerushalayim was filled with blood because of the murder. He killed Menashe so many people. This during the period of Bayis Rishon, and so many that he killed, he murdered without any sensitivity. This was Shvichas Dam. Remember, we had a Gemara earlier in Masechet Yoma that the first Mikdash was destroyed because of the big three. This is Shvichas Dam. Now the Gemara wants to know the following. Hi, Maisa Kadid. Let's just try to figure out logically which of these two terrible episodes came first chronologically. Was it the murder or was it the breaking of the leg? Hashta shvichas damim lo tkinu piasa. If you're going to tell me that Ilem shvichas damim came first, then the Rabbanim did not finally get the message here that the Kohanim are vying for each other, against each other for the schutz of the Trumas HaDeshen. They should have made a takana already at that point, that there's got to be a lottery. And they waited until another Kohen pushed his fellow Kohen off the kevich, and the guy broke his leg. On Nishba Raglo Tkinu, oh, they woke up after the second incident when the Kohen broke his leg. Then they decided to institute a pious. Ella, you're going to have to tell me that Nishba Raglo Kadin, that what first came was the breaking of the leg. We know, as the Mishnah records, they came into Tkinu Paisa, that immediately after this event happened and the victim broke his leg, they established the lottery. Is Arba Amos Maya Viditayu. And in this story that we saw in the Brisa with the murder that happened later, they were vying to get that Daled Amos. Why? I mean, if there was a pious, which was instituted after the first event when the Kohen broke his leg, why are they fighting over that Daled Amos? So the Gemara says the following: Eli Olam, the Shvichus Damim Kadin. How do we respond to such a murder? There are two ways of looking at it. You could say that what the background, the motivation, the cause of the murder was that competition, or you could say no. It's not the competition. There's something sick in society if a person can murder someone because they're, or maybe I could say it even a little better. It's not even a sickness in society. Maybe it's a sickness in that murderer. Now, he's the problem. But this is not necessarily indicative of the spirit of competition amongst the Kohanim that could bring them to injure and hurt and kill someone else. Meikar Sover, the Rabbanan came to the conclusion, Ekroi Bialmu. This was a weird fluke of a situation, of an occurrence. It was one Kohen who was a murderer. But came in the Chazi, Afilu Memela Asi Lidei Sakana. they saw that even when there wasn't a deliberate intention to murder someone, but they were rushing up the kevesh, and one guy pushed his way in and he pushed the other Kohen off the kevesh, is Tekina Rabbanan Pais. Then they realize they have to stop this. There's got to be a lot. Now we go back to the rice. Rabbi Tzadok Amala Seulam Yom Rachenu Beis Yisrael. Shimu. Hareu Omer Ki Motzei Chol Badom Anan Al Mi Lahavi Al Ha'ir O Al Ha'azharos. The Gemara says V'Yushalayim Bas Isuye Egla Rufahi. Is Rabbi Tzadok implying that in the case of a slain body found close to Yerushalayim, we need an Egla Rufa? For Sanya we have a brayso. Sorad var nemru b'Yerushalayim v'zu achas mihen. And one of the various special laws that reflects on the status of Yerushalayim is the halacha that Eina mevia egla mimena egla rufa.